I'm Jim Check.
And I'm Renee Merrifield.
And we're here with Beyond the Ballot. And so much going on as usual, and lots to get through. We're going to get into BC politics, but...
You know, Jim, I'm thinking that you just didn't understand how much politics affected life before. There is always something going on that is actually affecting us. So it's good that you stay politically in tune now.
I don't know how you did it. I mean, you were in the fray. You were actually in there on the receiving end of it. I mean, actually, a viewer this morning on our daily show said, I don't know how you guys do it. Like every day, the stuff that you expose, because like we get a lot of that Holly Dome Blacklock stuff that shows you all the waste and abuse and all that, and they're just like, CBC is not doing those stories, right? All the waste and abuse. And one of the stories we covered this morning, $109 million in aid to China for climate change and gender equality and human rights. Like all things that China has at the top of their list, right? Like, just
you can't make that stuff up.
President Xi cashed the check, and he's like, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll just get right on it, right?
Yeah.
The big question, though, in Canada, is Canada a nation, really? And can we have an oil pipeline? Is that BC coastline, or is it a Canadian coastline? And does Alberta have the right to ship its good to a Canadian coastline? And that's the question that doesn't seem to want to get answered. And here in a committee hearing, MP Holland is asking the environment minister here if we can get an oil pipeline. And this goes back and forth, and they will not commit to the word oil pipeline. Why is that? Why can't we get that commitment?
Because they're still pandering to a base that is, that they got voted in from on the Green side, right? If we remember, the Green vote was absolutely decimated in this last election, as was the NDP, and largely because Carney has been an environmental activist for the course of the last years, writing his book Values, etc. And so a lot of environmentalists and the voting public who care about those particular issues voted him in. So he's going to pander to that base. The reality is the federal government can and are the only ones with the power to circumvent provincial boundaries. So the answer is very apparent. Whether or not this federal government is going to take on that power, they have to enforce it, obviously, and that's the question: is will you enforce your power and actually get this through? And right now, we have a government that's unwilling. This is a very risky move for this government because largely the voting public is in favor of getting another pipeline out there. We're seeing the polling numbers in the 60s to 80s, depending on how they ask the question and who happens to answer the phone or is online at the moment. So those numbers, it's not wavering between 20 and 80%. We're at 60 to 80, which is the vast majority of Canadians want to see those pipelines built. And so this is a very dangerous stand for this government.
And I think Danielle Smith is making it really clear to people, too. There's like she's saying it in economic terms, there's $9 trillion worth of wealth beneath her feet, and she needs to get it to market. And the market is a coastline, and that's being stopped by not only David Eby, but by a non-response from the Carney Liberals.
Yeah, and I think that's really savvy of her to do, is to put it in terms that people understand. I saw on social media this week, and if I can find it, I'll repost it underneath on the comments. But it was a social media post about Saudi Arabia and Canada, basically talking about number 2 and number 3 in terms of oil reserves, but then all of the other natural resources that Canada actually possesses. And then this podcaster went through, that Saudi Arabia doesn't have any taxes. There are no personal income taxes, how it has a free healthcare system, how, there were stipends that were given, loans that were given for everyone to purchase a house of 150,000 Canadian equivalent. And so as this person was talking, it's like, well, and why doesn't Canada have that? Because our natural resources are tied up. I think that's why the polling numbers are as high as they are, is that Canadians are starting to realize energy is everything and cheap energy equals prosperity for the people.
Yeah, we played a clip the other day, I think it was 2 days ago now. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, which has a higher, the market cap is higher than Canada's GDP, said those exact words. Energy is everything, and it's Trump's pro-energy policies that are making America lead in AI. And I mean, it's so simple, yet it seems to be not resonating or not getting through to the decision makers here in Canada.
And on that note of energy, I don't know if you watched, but I believe it was Bill 22, but it was just introduced in the House in BC here, and basically it kind of falls under the auspices of trying to allocate energy resources, i.e., electricity, to certain industrial uses. But what it really reads when you dive into the details of that law is that they're actually going to ration electricity. And this is what gives the government power to go in and tell BC Hydro who gets power and who doesn't get power. This is insanely dangerous, and definitely one that we need to pay attention to as it goes through the House in the BC Legislative Assembly.
And one temporary ban becomes permanent too in fintech, which again is like AI, fintech. They go together, and you just said no to fintech, and guess where fintech will go? To Alberta or go to the US or go wherever. But that is another huge mistake. But
yeah, it really is. It's a big, big blunder. But what it also reveals is that BC is running out of electricity. They don't have enough electricity. In the bill, it actually describes that they need 4 Site C dams in order to power all of British Columbia's requirements. So they're spending billions of dollars getting electricity from outside of the boundaries, and that's a pretty dangerous position to be reliant on, natural gas and coal-powered electricity.
I don't know if you've heard, but Anita Nan announced it to the world that people are coming to Canada for what Canada has, and that's wind. I was puzzled, but
I'm very puzzled. That's strange. I haven't heard that before.
I was puzzled, but apparently. And here's one that's just as troubling too. Australia gets a deal. They were in the White House yesterday signing a deal with Trump on nothing other than rare earth minerals, which Canada has a plenty of. And here's Australia eating our lunch again. And they also took our canola deal too. They're just like, when China wouldn't buy our canola, they're just like, we'll buy that, or we'll sell you canola. And so now they got the rare earth minerals deal. And they also buy a lot of our resource companies too. Australia's been in Canada for quite a while doing this stuff. And the other one that is even more trouble, they're part of that AUKUS deal, and they got a nuclear sub. Canada's still going to buy diesel subs. It's just like we're playing a different game.
We're so far behind, and this is just acid in a wound. I said 2 things on election night when you and I covered election night. I said, number one, Carney has to give us a vision of our economy moving forward. We've already talked about, case in point, they're not even willing to say the word pipeline, in committee. The second thing I said is that we need to get a deal with the U.S. The U.S. is being incredibly strategic with how they are negotiating right now, and Canada is nowhere on that list right now. This is scary and very, very dangerous times. What this deal also did is it takes away China's power and buying power, and basically reallocates those rare earth minerals from China to the U.S. Very strategic, very savvy of the U.S. government. And I am purposefully not saying Trump, because I don't know if he's smart enough to do all of this on his own, but somebody in the background is driving these trade negotiations forward and being incredibly strategic and savvy. I know I said it many times.
I think that Trump 1.0 versus Trump 2.0 is the group of people around him. And I think that you keyed in on that. And that, I think, is so important, because I think the people he surrounded himself with this time are really like all A players. Even if you look at people like Marco Rubio and that, Scott Hessent and those guys. I mean, these are all people that have made vast fortunes that are now just coming to serve in the government. And they're making deals like Stephen Miller. These kind of guys are just like on next level, right? And they're making tons of deals. This one burns, though. This one really stings. This Australian deal really stings, because Canada is like a leading mining company. We've given away a lot of that. And we had the leading miners, we had the leading companies on the TSX, we had the leading properties. Australia's been buying our lunch for a long time, including this recently. You know what I mean? Like so much of the Canadian miners are mining somewhere else, and for them to get this rare earth mineral deal is just tough. Did you and I talk about the Trilogy metal thing yet? Was that, or were you? Yeah. So I mean, if you look, I asked Brenda Bailey, the finance minister, can you do a similar deal like what the Americans did with Trilogy Metals? Like, I mean, they're going to build them a road. Like, that's how you fast track something. Build them a road. And I said, will you do that here in British Columbia? She said yes. And so it remains to be seen what yes means.
Yeah, very much so remains to be seen. I haven't seen that type of infrastructure being committed to for those industrial uses. Jim, you raise a great point that if there's a country that's similar to Canada, it would be Australia. In profile, in natural resources, they're a natural gas provider. They have the rare earth minerals, and they're very agriculturally driven. So it's very similar to Canada in many ways. But they are eating our lunch. They are negotiating with China. They are negotiating with the U.S. They are getting their goods and services. And in doing so, look at the prosperity of the Australians. I mean, right now they are on fire and doing very well economically. So, again, I think that there's a lesson to be learned here, and it certainly isn't one that our government seems to be learning very quickly.
Yeah, and the nuclear sub one too. I was just like, Canada's looking to buy nuclear subs again, made somewhere else, not nuclear, sorry, diesel subs, which is like, like it's not even the same game as a nuclear sub. And nuclear subs can stay down for so long. I mean, that's the whole point of stealth submarines. That's the point of a submarine, right? Not to bang around making diesel noises out there.
Yeah, you definitely don't want it surfacing. That's kind of a bad thing. And this just this shows how not savvy our prime minister is. Our prime minister sided with countries that have less than 20% of their GDP tied up with the U.S. Rather than going with the U.S. And in doing so, I mean, we're a country that has 90% of our exports going to the U.S. It was such a blunder to declare, Palestine a Palestine state in direct opposition to our neighbors to the south and our largest trading partner, without opening up other trade opportunities. I mean, Carney is flitting about right now and on his lovely jet, flying around the world and really ignoring the U.S. at this point. But honestly, I think that this just shows how naive he is in just the political sphere.
Did you get a chance to watch that interview by that former British journalist on Bloomberg there in her new show?
I did not.
It's really good because, like Carney's been sitting down with foreign journalists way more than he's sitting down with Canadian journalists. And she pressed, because they press, right? They press on questions. And she pressed on him on his climate, his climate policies and that. And he assured her, she had the book on the table, Values. He assured her that he is the same me. That he said those words, I am the same me. Because she said, what happened to the Carney with the climate policies? And he assured her that he's the same me. And so that's telling. And then she asked him, would you arrest Benjamin Netanyahu? No beating around the bush, he just said yes. And there was a couple of very revealing things that he tries to hide from Canadian journalists, but I advise people to go watch that one. That one's pretty telling. And that tells you really what's going on with climate policy. And I think the word you're going to hear a lot more, and you and I have talked about it a little bit already, is carbon capture. That's going to be the new tax. They're just spinning it, kind of dressing it up a different way.
Yeah, and that definitely came out in his opposition's latest social media posts and videos, in which Carney is producing word salad and calling himself an elitist, and then saying, well, if this doesn't make sense, it's because it doesn't make sense. And basically, really, he's trying to talk around too much rather than talking and saying what he really means. And that's also a dangerous position to get yourself into, because you seem very disingenuous at that point.
And then this one is close to home for you too. Is in housing. Gregor Robertson, the housing minister, now making the admission in the Commons Finance Committee that it'll take many, many years to get to this record 500,000 homes. You said that a long time ago, but they kept saying they were going to do it because like I think housing starts last year 245, 367, and the max they ever did was 273,076 when we had a younger population. And now they're saying that these housing targets are looking like 2035 and that, so they just kick this can way down the road, right? What's that, 3 governments later?
Yeah, and I mean, the BC government did this as well. They tried to, post a number that was completely unrealistic. The entire development and housing industry said those are completely unrealistic numbers, and then I think they hoped it went away, and just like it has today, you don't hear them talking about housing targets anymore. They just don't. They don't even bring them up because they failed so miserably in delivering them. When you and I evaluated the housing policies of the different parties, that was one of the things I said right off the gate. This is a completely unrealistic, pie in the sky policy that's never going to come to fruition. And Gregor Robertson, to have him finally admit and say the quiet part out loud, which is, oh wait, we're not going to be able to get to these numbers. And 2035, yeah, great. In a decade from now, hopefully we will be innovative and innovating already by that point. Hopefully we will be building faster. But what we need is less bureaucracy and less governance. The housing industry is so heavily legislated, whether it's the affordability, the environmental measures, the building code in and of itself. There's new seismic, requirements that just came through. I mean, it is absolutely astronomical. And if you saw a list of everything that was required by the BC building code, in addition to the Heritage Conservation Act and getting a heritage permit on every single development, and then there's Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Environment, there's in agriculture. I mean, there is one after another, and that's before you even get to the municipality. So the whole DCC element, it's absolutely astronomical how much it costs, and really for people who are trying to get into housing, the number right now that's being used and being shown on white papers is about 35% of all housing is just government cost and taxes.
And now Gregor Robertson is saying housing prices need to come down. And that's in contradiction to what he said early on when he became housing minister, and he said the housing prices need to stabilize. And in this case, I think he might be front-running it, because I think there's bad news coming down the horizon for Canada. Because there's a couple of ways housing prices can come down. They can come down because you're increasing supply, you're incentivizing supply, you're getting a lot more out there, a lot more choices, and then you end up with housing like booming and building. Or there's the other way where you collapse the housing market and nobody's buying, and then properties are being foreclosed on. And I think we might be seeing some of that starting to show up. We're starting to see some mortgage defaults rising, and with interest rates are still high for a lot of these people that bought in 2020. There's 5-year renewals coming up, and they're going to get a little bit of mortgage sticker shock there.
Yeah, there was a roundtable discussion that I was participating in with Doug Porter, who is the chief economist of Bank of Montreal. And one of the things that he said is, we're probably through the worst of it for the most part, but it's a regional story. And the regional story in Toronto, the regional story in Vancouver is that those housing prices are still going to go down. There is standing inventory in the thousands and if not tens of thousands in Toronto. Those are not going to end well. You also see 2 of the largest home builders in Canada, Mattamy Homes, over 150 years of home building, and then you've got West Group in BC, who's one of the largest in BC. Peter Wessick there, and Bo Jarvis at the helm as the CEO. You see those 2 starting to literally pull projects. That is scary times. I mean, that is the first time in talking with Bo, that was the first time in his entire career he's ever pulled a project. And the first time in Peter Wessick's entire development life of 40 years that he's ever pulled a project. Those are dangerous statistics, because that also is the labor market. That's when you start seeing slowdowns in the construction industry. That's when you start seeing pullbacks in the economy. And again, 30% of BC's economy is construction. So when you start having projects pulled and BC building permit starts down, that is a really bad signal for what's to come.
Yeah, and I say this all the time in the build, and not in the rental market, but in the home ownership one, is the cranes are coming down, they're not going back up. And then that recently I interviewed Sharon Simpson yesterday, I think it was yesterday, And we talked about the Westcorp project downtown that the city ended up buying, and then they're going to look for a new buyer for that. And obviously, Westcorp, I mean, a lot of companies are pausing or just waiting for some certainty. And in British Columbia right now, we're going to talk about a little bit later, that certainty is getting tough to come by.
Yeah, and I mean, that project was when it was first purchased by Westcorp. That was they had a buy sell agreement with the city, so that if they did not proceed with that hotel site, that would be that the city could trigger that. So that in the development industry, that's not catastrophic. That just means, Westcorp didn't move forward. It's great that the city took that back and is looking at redeploying that piece of property to someone who can move it forward and hopefully move it forward fairly quickly. The one industry that is doing fairly well right now is the hotel industry. The Airbnb legislation is helping them astronomically right now. And so, the hotel definitely has some glimmer right now, and there might be another purchaser out there to take on a project of that order of magnitude.
Yeah, and I did ask when I talked to Brenda Bailey about the Airbnb policy again, and she's adamant that it's not hurting the industry. And also, I said, isn't that study that you keep relying on funded by the hotel industry? And she denied it. And then I went and checked it again, and they've kind of moved where it was said there, but it's still in there, right? That this study is funded by the BC Hotel Association. Imagine that.
It most definitely is funded by them.
They did move it from its prominence to just where you actually have to look for it. Melanie Jolie what's that?
To be a true study, it should be noted right at the beginning that there is a conflict of interest.
They shouldn't be using it. They shouldn't be using that study, right? That's ridiculous. And I asked Evie about that a while too. Canada urges pension funds to invest in at home an age of economic national. And that's like Melanie Jolie, and that's saying all this. Shouldn't the leader start? Shouldn't he demonstrate it with leadership? Carney move Brookfield back and also move his investments back to Canada? Like, isn't that what leadership is, by example?
This is it's such a ridiculous statement. The CPP is not beholden to the government. It's beholden to its shareholders and to its stockholders, and to its pensioners. It's not going to start doing that until Canadian companies start making money. That's so foolhardy to say that, and it's nothing more than grandstanding and peacocking to say it's somebody else's fault and it's CPP's fault that they're not investing. It's Ontario, teachers' pension fund, and it's like, no, you know what, if we were doing a great job, if we had government out of the way, if bureaucracy was where it should be, and we had a tax structure and strategy that actually incented companies to invest, we would see it, and we don't right now. This is a government story, and government is failing businesses.
I would, if I got to ask the question of Melanie Jolie, I would say, why don't you ask the person sitting beside you in Parliament that question first? Ask him first. Why? Because that's the answer. Why doesn't he move his money back here? And there you'll find the problem. That's where you'll find the problem. If he'll tell you why he doesn't have his money here, because he said it's access to capital, all those things. And so there you go. There's the problem, right? He'll identify it for you. It's not rocket science.
No, it's an issue.
Justin Trudeau celebrated his 10-year anniversary there with a post. I guess he was trying to show off to Katy Perry or something and seeing if he could get a lot of, I guess he was missing praise in that. It kind of like backfired huge though. Like definitely didn't go over very well.
No, it landed with a thud. It was, I mean, the ratio on social media posts was absolutely horrific. Yeah, he will go down in history as one of the worst prime ministers, leaving people so much worse off than when he started. It's just atrocious.
But he's definitely still is wearing those rose-colored glasses, because his post where he named his accomplishments there, Ian and I went through, were just like you were seeing life in a different perspective than most average Canadians see it.
Yeah, and I guess he thinks that we can't fact check, or that, you can't just say, grok, is any of this true? Where are we at? Or, or we can't, put it into, a chat GPT and say, tell me if this is actually true. Like, I mean, honestly, it's ridiculous. And he's just proving his irrelevance, and he's proving how out of touch he is.
Pierre Poilievre in a podcast made some pretty, I guess, damning claims, like controversial claims on Justin Trudeau. But instead of the media saying, like, we should look at that because, here, this is a pretty big, statement that Pierre Poilievre has made. No, they've gone on full attack. And the CTV, Liberals, Greens, NDP call on Poilievre to apologize. Elizabeth May came out and just like, it's nobody's looking into it. They're just like, how dare he say those things, instead of saying, why don't we just take a look at some of those allegations that he's making?
Yeah, I was one of those geeks that followed that entire committee and hearing very, very closely, including the firing of Jody Wilson-Raybould. And I've read her book, which is insane. If you have not read Indian in the Cabinet, please do. It is absolutely a tell-all that should be read by everyone, to really truly understand what she endured and how strong she had to remain in order to actually uphold the law on behalf of all Canadians. And I also had the opportunity to meet her in Vancouver, and she is strong and mighty, that's for sure. So I was one of the ones that was following this story very, very carefully, and Pierre Poilievre is right. The RCMP covered up. They refused to do the investigation, and in large case, probably were intimidated by the Prime Minister in the same way that he attempted to intimidate Jody Wilson-Raybould.
Their pattern is so easy to, Their pattern is so easy to see, because as soon as he said it, Ian, I played that clip on the Daily Show. And I said, the machine's going to ramp up. They're going to go right after him, and that includes the media. The machine is going to go after him, and they did. They didn't ask questions on what the accusations he's making. They just went at Poilievre. They just went at him full force, and that includes the Liberals, the Green, the NDP, the CTVs, the CBCs, all of them. It was just attack Pierre Poilievre, and all the pundits and as well. Very few people have come out and said, why don't we just take a look? And then they talk about how dare you go after a former prime minister. And then I think, well, didn't we go after Brian Mulroney? Like, what was I? Like, where was I? Like,
didn't we go after Chrétien? Didn't we go after, I mean, come on. That's fair game. That's fair game. But honestly, wow. The mainstream media is desperate to prop up a prime minister that's not doing really great right now. No. He is not. He's not on everyone's Christmas list yet. They can feel the Canadian public starting to get really, really antsy. And so, and they're starting to see the polls, which put the Conservatives ahead of the Liberals right now, which is really scary considering that the Liberals don't have a strong NDP. In fact, they have an obliterated NDP that's getting between 6% and 8% in the polls that I've seen. So we're looking at a really difficult time for Carney right now. And so, the mainstream media, which we've talked ad nauseum, they just simply are not doing a great job. They're not holding, government's feet to the fire. They're not holding them accountable. And it is the independents that largely are the voice right now of Canadians. So, it's almost like, are they even relevant anymore? And, Pierre is used to being under fire. He's used to, having that level of antagonism. Having said that, I did see him kind of backtrack and explain, which is never a good look. Anytime that you're defending, you've already lost, is kind of the saying in politics. So my only thing is that I wish he wouldn't have retracted, but leaned in and moved further and said, well, who wouldn't want to prosecute, a prime minister who did blah, 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 blah. Right. Like,
I didn't hear the references like of Mulroney and Chrétien, you know what I mean? Like, because you brought up that, like, why don't we look? Like, because that's a normal course. That's what we should be doing. We had Jonathan Kay in this morning, and he's, been in media politics and all that stuff. He actually ghost writ Justin Trudeau's memoirs. I'm not a big fan now, though. But one of the things he said was, as bad as it is for some of Canada, he says, are you guys okay in BC? He said, this is just an absolute travesty going on here in British Columbia, the politics here. He said, like, you guys are on next level self-destruct. And, like, what is going on?
Next level self-destruct. If we just talk about the political aspects, you and I had this conversation. John Rustad is not a leader. He does not have strength. He does not have chutzpah. He has lost now 5 female MLAs, which doesn't bode well. It doesn't bode well for his caucus. I think these are the 5 that have the least to lose in certain cases. I think he thought getting rid of Eleanor Sturko would silence others. That is just simply not the case. And until he goes, I think he's going to see more tumult. If he does not have his closest advisors saying maybe it's time to call it, then they're not good advisors. If I was advising him, I'd be like, John, go out right now and call it and get another leader in here. You remain the leader in the House. You remain the leader while they do a leadership race, but actually get something moving forward. This is atrocious. It is abysmal, and with a government that's performing as poorly as the NDP, the Conservatives should be surging. They should be in the 50s and 60 percentiles, and instead they've lost 15% since the election and are sitting well behind the NDP. And right now the polls are predicting the NDP would have a majority if they were to run again.
I asked that question of Gavin Dew and a few others. Like the stoves and the pot seem to be boiling over everywhere. Like, the finance, the health, decriminalization, like you could go on and on and on. You could name all these things that seem to be just a mess. And I think Jonathan Kay said it too. He said maybe BC's conservative movement here has to completely fracture and wait for a Stephen Harper type guy to come in and actually pick it up and mold it into something that needs to be done. Because he said John Rustad kind of put pieces together that don't belong together too. Do you know what I mean? Like they didn't fit well. And that's maybe why it's all falling apart. But like even some of the tactics, I interviewed Amelia yesterday, and even if she had some mental health issues, I just don't think it was classy of Rustad to go out there and say, like she has mental health issues and blow her off as like, you know what I mean? Like it was very classless. And maybe what happened to Kevin Falcon's going to happen to Rustad too, is the money people are going to say, you know what, we're done with you. Like you're going to we're not going to fund this.
Yeah, and that's what needs to happen. I mean, the business community has to rally and has to actually do the hard work of saying the quiet part out loud, which is that John Rustad's time is over. If we remember, Stephen Harper was a very reluctant leader. He was not the one that was out there, tooting his own horn and wanting to be the leader. He was a very reluctant leader, but he was chosen because he was neutral and because he was a really good brand ambassador for both sides, and he was able to ease the social conservatives minds at the same time, really pressing on what they could all agree on together. And that's really what needs to happen from Centre BC to One BC and everything in between, which is BC cons. They really need to come together and say, we're going to focus on what we all agree on, which is a strong energy economy, a strong economy, healthcare for all, and great infrastructure, and how about a great education system, world-class education system. It can be as simple as that. It's gotten way too complicated, way too activist related on both the right and the left. And I think the right needs to grow up and be an adult and be the adult in the room, because right now the NDP is not. The NDP is being a child. And honestly, I'm so disappointed by their stance on the whole Cowichan case and in not arguing extinguishment of title rates. I just think that this is an absolute mess, and you're going to see further investment dollar flee. You're going to see further chaos, further antagonism between the Indigenous population and the rest of BC and its citizens. And I think this is just an absolute disaster. So you're right. Whether it's Obgyn's leaving en masse in Kamloops, whether it's the pediatric ward shutting down in Kelowna, whether it's Delta losing its ER. I mean, we could talk ad nauseum about the healthcare issues and finances. Let's go to finances next. I mean, we're absolutely in the toilet, which is why the BCGEU is still, striking 7 weeks in. I mean, there is no money. there is no money to give them. It doesn't grow on trees, and they haven't prepared for this. So anything that they put into, and I wouldn't be surprised if they take this all the way through to the next, to the next year, their next calendar year, or sorry, financial year, because honestly, they cannot afford to put more deficit into this year.
I mean, this looks like a big opportunity for Eby to call an election and get his majority. But it's also, I look at it and say, like, this could be the birth of a real Conservative Party that's kind of more center. I interviewed Corinne Kirkpatrick too. She's running the Centre BC Party. In your mind, is there a Stephanie or a Stephen Harper out there that could actually coalesce like the center and bring people to the center? Because I don't think BC's either, you and I have talked about this many times, either far left extremists like Jason Kenney calls David Eby a mud hutter. And then he said John Horgan actually called him mud hutter. You can't argue that now. And then also on the other side, and I don't think John Rustad is an extreme right, but I mean, people paint him that way. But is there a Stephanie or Stephen Harper out there that can actually bring BC together and bring these factions together and pick the right pieces, the puzzle, to kind of like lead BC into a better tomorrow?
I mean, the reality is, yes, there's always a Stephen or Stephanie. There's always that person who could rise up and be that centrist. Is it Corinne Kirkpatrick? No, she is a North Vancouver, West Vancouver darling who, I mean, she's got a great story in terms of her life story, but she is definitely, from wealth, and that's not going to bode well for anywhere outside of the Lower Mainland. In fact, it doesn't even bode well, when you get to Surrey. So, I can't see the One BC party under Corinne really taking off. Could it be under someone else, someone different? For sure. Could it be under an Eleanor Sturko? I still think she is one of the strongest.
That's the dark horse that I would say. Yeah.
And one of the strongest, and she's also focused. She could say, we're going to get tough on crime. We're going to have a great economy. And the other thing about Eleanor is that she knows enough to know what she doesn't know, and she'll surround herself with great and smart people. People really get loyal to her. I know that she took a few of the staff members with her when she left because people like her and people like working with her and for her. And, so I could see an Eleanor really being that rallying point. She is a Surrey, RCMP officer, but she was a communications officer. So she has, a great poise, great presence. She speaks insanely well. She doesn't have a lot of gaffes, and she's very humble. She's not from wealth. She's not from money. She doesn't have a silver spoon in her mouth. She doesn't have a lot of money now. That isn't going to be held against her. She can really be a voice of the people and well loved by many. So, yeah, is there one? For sure. Is it John Rustad? No. But is it someone like an Eleanor Sturko? I think so.
She is a great communicator, and those are one of the things that most people are looking for right now, is a straight shooting communicator. And I said that to Corinne. I said, does your party become null and void if an Eleanor Sturko takes over the Conservative Party, because she will pull everything to the center anyway? So is there a reason for your party if all of a sudden she says, well, we're going to do this? That remains to be seen if that's what happens. But, I think with Jonathan Kay, I go watch that, but he was really good in explaining that there will be a Stephanie or a Stephen Harper rise up in BC that will actually figure out how to bring the good people back to the party too. Because, I think when Rustad threw the ball down when Falcon handed to him, I think he could actually be in government right now. He could have formed government. But yeah, I think he let his ego get in the way, and he tossed out good candidates that ran against him as independents and likely cost them 4 or 5 seats.
Yeah, and he got bad advice from people that thought that it was their activism that was winning, rather than seeing it for what it was, which is that they had a C that rivaled or was very a replica of the federal C and the same colors, and an ad campaign of $4 million running nationwide. They just simply missed that, and to misunderstand your success, I think, is a real foible of ego, and so I think that they've got to really do some really good navel gazing and understanding how they're going to come together. And I think the first thing they have to do is get rid of John Rustad and get someone who is more of a centrist, but understands economically where we need to go and is very strong on that way. And that's one of my concerns about a Corinne Kirkpatrick as well. She's a Green. She says, at times that she should have run for the Green Party. That to me is like, you've missed it. You've missed how big business is and what we need to do and how we need to move forward.
I asked her a pretty basic question I think most politicians need to answer right now. I said, is Canada a nation or a collection of provinces? And she spun around for a while, and I kept pressing, and I just like, is Canada a nation? Is it Canadian coastline or is it a BC coastline? And, I think at the end she said, I'm Canadian first, but right now we need decisive action, right? We need, because stuff needs to get done. We can't do committees and hearings and consultations, and we don't have time. We need somebody that's going to be a person of action that speaks clearly. And I think that's how Danielle Smith is very popular. She speaks, you know what Danielle Smith's all about. You're not confused, right? You shouldn't be confused after you listen to Danielle Smith. You can listen to her for a couple of her speeches or town halls. She actually goes out and does town halls, EB. She goes out and does town halls and listens to the people.
Yeah, and she speaks very cleanly. And it's because she's true. What she says she believes, and what she says she's going to do, she does. So, there is no pretense with her, and really we need a leader that is like that. The other person that comes to mind that I think could be a dark horse as well is an Ian Black. Like an Ian Black, who was the Vancouver Board of Trade CEO for many years, who is a conservative. I think that he could actually be one of those that could really rise up and be, a real unifier, someone who understands the Lower Mainland. He ran in Port Moody, I believe it was. He did not win his seat. But, someone that federally he ran, but someone who really understands the Lower Mainland, but has a good understanding of what's beyond and how the prosperity of the Lower Mainland is largely determined by everything beyond it. So I think that he could be a real voice as well. And again, someone who is eloquent, very statesmanly, but also speaks his mind and is very plain.
When I did get to interview Brenda Bailey, I did ask the question on certainty of capital. You and I talk about it a lot. And I said, with this couch and land decision, how is there certainty for British Columbians, even in private land, especially developers and different things? How do you go, even big projects, like how do you go ahead and invest billions of dollars with that cloud hanging over your head? And she says, yeah, and we need to appeal that decision. But, when I interviewed Jeff Moyes, it said that, they didn't. They kind of let this happen, and even some of the negotiations they're doing all behind closed doors, and they're just presenting, here's what's happened. And I think that this could put BC into a spot where capital just continues to flee.
Well, it's more than just closed doors. They just introduced a new law that will have all Indigenous negotiations unFOIable. Basically, they're basically doing it all behind closed doors. This is a disaster. This Cowichan case is an absolute disaster. Thank God for Malcolm Brodie, who's not running again, who has nothing to lose, no party affiliations whatsoever, and he's been critical of all parties, really provincially. So there is no allegiance there on any one side. But thank God that he sent out the letters, and it hit the social media channels like crazy, and then started. I saw it on Indian Times in India. I saw it it was in Europe and covered, in the BBC. This went huge across the world, and basically was scratching a head and saying, what is BC doing? This is absolutely ridiculous. And if anyone thinks that this is not on the government's path, it most certainly is. The justice cited the Haida case, the DRIPA being ratified in the House as the two governing factors for this decision. So absolutely, this is the NDP's doing. They did not argue extinguishment in the court case. The federal government also followed suit. So anyone who thinks the federal government's all that in a bag of potato chips needs to really rethink that with respect to what they're doing with property rights right now. So I see the only out on this one being probably a Section 35 change or an injunction, seeking an injunction, which is really what the government should be doing right now. Take us back to the law before this was actually in a decided case, and allow us to operate as it was before. Because right now, The banks are being quiet, but they are watching very carefully and making their decisions. And once the banks have decided that you can't actually get a mortgage, once title insurers have decided, I'm sorry, it's too much risk, we will not be able to give you title insurance, we have a very large issue in BC.
And it's, some people have said up to 95% of BC could be under, title challenge, right? So unresolved claims.
Well, I've seen maps where it actually is like 280% of BC. Like basically, there's so many
overlapping claims and that.
Overlapping claims, yeah.
Nova Scotia apparently has the same problem. Yeah.
Which is true in this Cowichan case. I mean, the Musqueam are part of the ones that are going to be, Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and Squamish. So they're all, appealing the decision because they're saying, well, those are fishing grounds for us. Those were camping grounds for us.
We got 6 minutes left. I'm going to give you 2 topics left here. Calgary, Jason Kenney just congratulated Jeremy Farkas there, winning Calgary. And, that's, what's a Mayor Goodnick? Is that how you pronounce her name? Goodnick?
I thought it was
Gondek or something like that, right? Yeah.
But one and done, one termer. That was it. That was all. And to finish third, that's pretty embarrassing.
She was fairly arrogant and very left. I mean, she was canceling Canada Day, a whole bunch of things. And, you might get away with that in Edmonton, but I don't think you're going to get away with that in Calgary very long, right? So
I don't think you'll get away with anywhere in Alberta. I mean, Nenshi was very far left. He was an NDPer. He was mayor. He definitely took Calgary into some places. I think that that was different. But let's remember the NDP in Alberta are more centrist. They are kind of the more John Horgan-esque, and not really the NDP of David Eby. So, she was bizarre. She did some very, very strange things, and I mean, this is Calgary basically saying, yeah, no. Very strong turnout in Calgary, not so strong in Edmonton, those mayoral races. Andrew Knack, I mean, that's no surprise to me. I think Andrew was a great ward councillor in Edmonton. He definitely represented the West Side there for many, many years. And for him to take over, as mayor, I think will be a great one. I wouldn't have called the Calgary one yet. I mean, 600 votes is pretty tight, and there's still a recount to happen. So maybe 600 won't be overturned, but we're talking each of those candidates almost 100,000 votes each. So that's a significant amount that were cast on behalf of those 2 candidates. So it might be a little bit premature, but definitely 2 very moderate and if not right-wing candidates that were up on that number 1 and number 2 spot in Calgary.
I'm going to hang it all on Jason Kenney, who just recently called David Eby a mudhutter, and also said John Horgan called him a mudhutter. That's going around the internet a little bit because, who can ask John Horgan now? He said John Horgan told them that he has to watch the extreme left of his party, the mudhutters like David Eby. And
it's true.
And who would have thought that we'd be praying for John Horgan again, right, to come back and run the BC NDP? But
God bless him. Yeah. I mean, I know as a legislator on the opposite side of John Horgan for just 2 years of my 4, I can honestly say that he would have been difficult to beat. He was he was a centrist. He had moved more into the center throughout the course of his duration. I mean, the only things that I really disagreed with him on were some of the union laws that were put into place. But outside of that, I mean, he was still a centrist. He'd pick up the court cases. And that's another thing. Like, how disingenuous is David Eby to say, like, we're going to, fight this pipeline? It's like, dude, you can't. And you know that because you were the attorney general when you tried that the first time under Horgan and lost. So please do not spend more of BC's money on a court case that is completely meaningless because it's meaningless and you know that you can't win it. So, from my perspective, this is just, more performative politicking, and it's pretty disgusting. I guess he thinks that we forget or that we don't know, and that the voting public won't know.
Well, I like to end stuff on a hopeful note, and here's one that's a little pie in the sky. There used to be a saying back maybe 100 years ago, go west, young man, for your fortune. And it might be go north for your fortune. There's a couple of pitches going on. It sounds like Trump is pitching Danielle Smith on a railroad to Alaska. And then the Russians have reached out to Trump and said, we want you to build a tunnel between Siberia and Alaska and we want Elon Musk to do it with the Boring Company. And it's only 53 miles. It's absolutely doable. If you run it through ChatGPT, you're going to see it's not even going to cost that much money. And the trip then from continent to continent would be 20 minutes versus 4 weeks on a ship. You think what that would do for the economies and opening up trade routes between, like, you basically could then go from South America all the way to Africa without ever going on water. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
I mean, these two glimmers are basically, again, the U.S. is doubled down on infrastructure. That railroad line that is being spoken of is absolutely a possibility. There is studies that have been done. It's absolutely been tested out and could be a very viable option. The only thing I will say is that then we are taking Canadian goods and putting it through the U.S. again. And this last week we saw that that our natural gas is indeed going to Europe and it's being sold through the U.S.
At a profit for them.
Profit for the U.S.
And
So,
then,
I mean, again, if we have not learned anything, please let us learn that we need to have our own pipelines and our own ports and our own infrastructure that actually gets our goods to port and through to where it needs to go. So, I'm a big believer that we have to invest in infrastructure. My hope is that in this budget we see that. Maybe that's what Carney is telegraphing in how he's saying we're going to invest in the future. But let's definitely hope that that is the case.
If you take the politics out of it, though, just on basic economics, that Bering Strait tunnel would change the world economies. It would absolutely change the world economies. You would be able to, and if the people that are worried about climate change, it would actually take, like diesel ships coming across, 4 weeks to come across the ocean, fight with weather and all that stuff. You would have high-speed trains moving goods over land. And, some people say you can't do trains in the north. Well, they do it in Siberia. They seem to have figured it out, so.
Yeah, I don't mean to be a damper, and I want to keep it on a very optimistic and hopeful note. But you can also get weapons and linking two countries. You want to be sure that the other country has the best of intentions.
Well, I got to take the politics out of that one because that other country happens to be Russia. Yeah. But it could be the greed of the economy that solves that Ukraine war too, because I think that's what they're using it as, and they're saying you want to be back part of the economy, you need to stop that nonsense, and because how do you keep people out of wars? I mean, the reason that China hasn't invaded Taiwan, it would actually blow an economic hole into China as well, right? That is the thing. So again, if you think about it, even from a personal standpoint, people that have stuff to lose don't steal at stores typically. You know what I mean? Like people that have nothing to lose typically will commit more crime, right? Because they're in a desperate place. But if you have lots, like Dubai is not going to get into any wars, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is now in a place where they used to facilitate terrorism. They don't do that stuff anymore, right?
They don't need to.
If the economies are healthy and everybody's healthy, then all of a sudden, like war becomes like one of the last things you look at, right? So.
Very true.
Again, it's always been great, and thank you. And then hopefully there's a Stephanie or Stephen out there that have been listening here and can help.
And then we get them in place really fast.
All right. Thank you for watching Now Media.